My name is Julia. I'm 29, and this is a part of my story I never thought I'd be strong enough to share. It starts not with heartbreak, but with hope, quiet, patient hope that grew slowly in the corners of my heart, long before the silence became unbearable. I used to believe that love could survive anything, that if two people cared enough, they could weather storms, carry each other through darkness, and always find their way back to light. I believed this not because I was naive, but because I had felt something that seemed unbreakable. It wrapped around me like warmth on a cold morning, gentle and steady. I held it close, I nurtured it. I waited for it to bloom into forever, when life shifted and I found myself in the hospital. Fragile, uncertain, afraid. I clung to that feeling. I thought the hardest part would be the diagnosis, the pain, the exhaustion that settled into my bones, but it wasn't. The hardest part was the waiting, the quiet, endless waiting. Not for treatment, not for test results, but for a face that didn't come, for footsteps that never reached my door, for a message that never lit up my screen. A heart that waits in silence begins to question its worth. I remember lying in that hospital bed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of machines, pretending it didn't bother me that the chair next to me remained empty. I made excuses, told myself he must be busy, that life outside those walls was demanding, that he cared in ways I couldn't always see. I replayed old words in my mind, promises of forever, of standing by me no matter what came our way. I held onto those words like they were lifelines. The nurses were kind. They asked if someone would be coming. I smiled and said yes, even when I wasn't sure. I watched other patients receive visitors, flowers, cards, laughter that echoed into the hallway, and I turned my head toward the window, pretending to be distracted by the sky. Each day passed like a question left unanswered. There's something painfully intimate about being alone when you're at your most vulnerable, when you're hooked to machines, pale and worn, and your body feels like it's no longer yours. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be the version of myself that laughed through the pain, that said, I'm fine, and meant it, but I wasn't fine. I was hurting, I was scared, and I was waiting. Sometimes I'd imagine him walking in, oft smile, tired eyes, saying he got caught up, but he was here now. I imagined the way it would feel to have his hand in mine again, to rest my head against his shoulder like I used to. I'd close my eyes and whisper into the silence, just show up. That's all I need. But silence was the only thing that answered back. I think what made it worse was the hope. Hope makes you sit up a little when footsteps pass by your door. It makes your heart skip every time your phone buzzes. It keeps you believing, day after day, that maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe tomorrow he'll remember. Maybe tomorrow love will look like showing up. But tomorrow never came. The doctors told me I was healing well, that I could go home soon. I nodded, smiled politely, and thanked them. On the outside, I looked okay. On the inside, something had cracked. Not all at once, but slowly, like ice melting under pressure, like a dam giving way to quiet floods. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just tired. Tired of waiting, tired of pretending, tired of holding space for someone who had let go of mine. I gathered my things on the day I was discharged, folded my blanket, packed my books, and glanced one last time at the empty chair beside my bed. I whispered goodbye, not to him, but to the version of me that had waited so long for someone who wouldn't come. I walked out of that room with my own 2 feet, steady but forever changed. Some goodbyes aren't loud. Some aren't even said out loud. They happen in moments of silence, in the quiet surrender of hope. And that's how my heart learned to stop waiting. I used to measure time by smiles and warm glances, by quiet laughter shared over coffee, and soft whispers under blankets when the world outside felt far away. There was once a garden in my heart where love grew so easily, so naturally, I thought it would always bloom. It felt effortless then, like the way sun follows dawn, like the way breath fills your lungs without asking. That's what love was to me, unquestioned, rooted, sure. I didn't see the change when it started. Maybe I didn't want to. Love doesn't die all at once. It fades in the quiet, in the way messages take longer to come, in the way words lose their warmth, in the way promises sound like echoes instead of anchors. There was a time when every "I'm here" felt like safety. Then one day it didn't come, and after that, it just stopped altogether. The hospital walls were pale and quiet, too quiet, and there I was, wrapped in wires and weary bones, holding onto a belief that love doesn't walk away when things get hard. I still had hope then, even if it was cracked and trembling. I still believed that promises meant something, that what we'd built together wouldn't vanish just because I was no longer easy to hold. Every time the door creaked open, I looked up. Every time the hallway filled with footsteps, my heart leapt before it fell. I kept telling myself maybe today, maybe this hour, maybe in just a few more minutes. It's strange how long a minute can feel when you're counting on it to change something. The hours turned into days, and still I waited. The nurses were gentle. Their kindness both comforted and wounded me. They asked if I needed anything. I shook my head and smiled, even when my throat felt like it was closing. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, all the pain would come spilling out, and I wouldn't be able to stop it. There was one morning early when the sun hadn't quite filled the room. I reached for my phone instinctively, hoping for something, anything. The screen was empty, no missed calls, no messages, just silence. That was the morning I finally cried, not because I was sick, not because the pain was unbearable, but because something inside me finally admitted what my heart hadn't wanted to believe. The promises we once held onto, the ones spoken with such certainty and depth, they had withered in the shadow of my suffering. They had bloomed in spring, but could not survive the storm. I cried quietly, with my back turned to the room, as if hiding my tears would somehow protect the love I'd already lost. I let them fall for every late night conversation, every hand held tightly, every kiss that once told me I was safe. I cried for the girl who believed that love stayed no matter what. I cried because I missed being someone worth showing up for. There were no grand betrayals, no cruel words or loud departures, just absence, just silence, just the slow erosion of presence. I think that's what hurt most, the emptiness where something used to live, the soft space where once a promise had taken root. I kept thinking about all the times I was told, "I'll always be there." It echoed in my mind like a lullaby gone wrong. At first, I tried to convince myself there was a reason. Maybe something had happened. Maybe there was guilt or fear or confusion. I wanted so badly to give grace, to believe that people struggle, and sometimes they don't know how to be what we need. But even grace needs a landing place. Eventually, I stopped checking the door. I stopped glancing at my phone. I stopped hoping, and in that stopping, I started to breathe again, slowly, unevenly, but it was a beginning. Love had bloomed once, beautiful and wide, like spring on the edge of winter. But it had not survived the cold, and now all that remained were petals on the floor of my memory, wet with the tears I could no longer hold back. Some stories don't end with thunder or fire. Some just dissolve quietly like morning mist. The hospital room didn't change much. same walls, same machines, same slow ticking of time, but inside me, everything was shifting. Healing, they called it. Progress, recovery. The words sounded hopeful on paper, but they didn't capture what it really felt like. They didn't tell the truth about the silence or the emptiness that settled into the corners of every hour. Healing wasn't just physical. It was learning to sit with pain that had no medicine. It was teaching my heart to beat differently without the rhythm of someone else's presence. I had always thought pain would be loud, sharp and fierce, something you couldn't ignore. But this kind was quiet. It whispered when no one was watching. It followed me through the nights when the halls fell silent, and the only voice I heard was my own. The doctors were pleased. They said I was getting stronger. They smiled, nodded, encouraged, and I smiled back because I was supposed to, because that's what you do when you're trying to be brave. But inside, I felt hollow. My body was healing, yes, but my heart was still bleeding in places no one could see. It was during those long, quiet days that I began to understand what loneliness really was. Not just being alone, but feeling invisible. Feeling like your pain is too quiet to be heard. Like your presence doesn't stir even a ripple in the life of the one you once meant everything to. There were moments I felt like a ghost of the person I used to be. One who used to laugh easily, who believed she was never truly alone. Loneliness doesn't shout. It echoes. I would sit by the window when I had the strength, watching people outside move through their day. Cars passing, people talking, a child laughing. Life continued untouched by mine, and I couldn't help but wonder, did he pause even once? Did a memory cross his mind? Did a song come on the radio and remind him that I was still here, still waiting in a place he hadn't dared to visit? The answer came in silence, in the nothingness that arrived each morning and stayed with me until nightfall. It wrapped around me like a second skin, and even as I got stronger, I felt it tighten. They say healing is a journey, but they don't tell you how lonely the road can be, especially when the person who promised to walk it with you disappears when the path becomes rough. I kept thinking back to all the plans we had made, weekend trips, lazy Sundays, shared breakfasts. So much of my future had once been drawn around his presence, and now I was learning how to erase him from the picture without tearing the whole canvas apart. There were days I didn't cry, and I took that as a win. There were days I did cry, and I let it happen quietly so the nurses wouldn't worry. And in between those moments, I began piecing myself back together, not with grand gestures or sudden awakenings, but slowly, gently, breath by breath. I learned to sit with my loneliness instead of fighting it. I stopped looking toward the door. I stopped wondering if he would call. I stopped counting the days since he'd last reached out. That number had grown too large to hold. Healing became something different than I expected. It wasn't about forgetting, and it wasn't about forgiving right away. It was about making space for my own voice in a life that had once been filled with his. It was about letting the silence stretch and not rushing to fill it with a hope that had long since wilted. There was one afternoon, late into my stay, when the sun came through the window just right. I closed my eyes and felt it on my skin, warm, steady, familiar, and I realized that even in the deepest loneliness, something inside me had held on. Some part of me had stayed strong enough to wait, not for him, but for myself. Because even when no one showed up, even when the days blurred into each other and the nights felt too long, I had stayed. I had endured. Loneliness echoed through those healing days, but so did strength I never knew I had. There was a time when love felt endless. It wasn't something I questioned or doubted. It was just there, like air, like light, always surrounding me. We built something that looked solid, something that felt safe. I remember how easily the laughter came, how naturally the small moments became memories. Sunday mornings, tangled blankets, quiet glances across the room. It all felt real. It felt like it would last. But pain has a way of revealing what love is made of. It doesn't knock politely or ask permission. It arrives uninvited, and when it does, it doesn't just test your body. It tests everything around you. It changes the air, shifts the ground beneath your feet. And that's when I began to see the cracks in what I thought would never break. I didn't expect him to fix everything. I never asked to be saved. I only wanted presence, a hand to hold, a word to lean on, someone to remind me I wasn't alone in the hardest season of my life. But instead of showing up, he slowly began to disappear. It started subtly. Shorter messages, delayed responses, excuses that came more often than comfort. At first, I told myself he was just overwhelmed, that it was hard for him too, that love sometimes needs space, but space turned into distance. And distance turned into silence. And before I could find the right words to ask what was happening, he was already gone in all the ways that mattered. Pain became my companion. Not just the physical ache in my body, but the deeper ache. The one that came from being forgotten by someone who once promised never to leave. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments that used to mean something. I clung to memories like they could explain the present. Like maybe, if I remembered who we were, it would bring him back to who he used to be. But memories are cold comfort when the present is hollow. I remember sitting in that hospital bed, wondering if love can really disappear that fast. If it can evaporate the moment you're no longer easy to be around. I kept thinking about how he used to look at me, like I was the best part of his life. But pain changed that. It made me harder to love, maybe, quieter, slower, more dependent, and instead of rising to meet me in that space, he turned away. There's something devastating about realizing love wasn't as deep as you believed, that it was conditional even if no one said it out loud, that it had limits, boundaries, and expiration date marked by the moment I became too much. Healing was supposed to be about recovery, but for me, it was also about grieving a version of love that couldn't survive the storm. I spent so many days hoping he would walk through the door just once, to prove me wrong, to tell me he got scared, but he never stopped caring, that he missed me, that he regretted leaving, but he didn't. And so I sat with the truth, even when it hurt more than the illness itself. I let it settle in my chest. I let it break me, because pretending I was fine only made the loneliness worse. I didn't want to lie to myself anymore. I didn't want to keep waiting for someone who had already chosen to leave. Love, I've learned, isn't always loud when it ends. Sometimes it fades quietly, unnoticed at first. It slips away in small, tired sighs. In missed calls, in the silence between words. It fades when you're no longer seen, when your pain becomes inconvenient, when the person who once held your hand decides it's too heavy now. But even in that fading, I found something. Not hope, not right away, but a kind of stillness, a strange peace in the knowing, because once you see the truth, you stop searching for illusions. You stop begging for love that has already walked away. I am still healing, in more ways than I expected, but now the space beside me is no longer a place of waiting. It is a space I am learning to fill with my own strength, my own quiet resilience, because when pain arrived, love faded. But I remained. I didn't let go easily. Even when things started slipping, even when the silence grew heavier, I still held on, not to the past exactly, but to the idea that maybe it wasn't over, that somewhere beneath the cold distance, something good still lived. Hope is like that, it stays, even when everything else begins to vanish. In those quiet days at the hospital, I clung to the small things, a message, even a short one, a voice note, a call that never lasted long, but arrived just enough to keep the hope alive. I told myself he cared, just didn't know how to show it right now. I made room for all the reasons, for all the ways he might be hurting too. That's what love does sometimes. It stretches itself thin, even when it's not being held in return. I remember one night, the room dim and still, and I couldn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling and thought about how warm everything used to feel. Love once lived in the little things, a coat draped over my shoulders, fingers brushing mine when we walked, the way he used to say my name like it mattered. But those things were gone now. I hadn't realized how much I missed them until I was lying in a bed no one came to sit beside. The warmth had disappeared, and I didn't know exactly when it had happened. It wasn't sudden. It faded, like the last trace of sunlight slipping from the sky. At first, I didn't want to admit it. I told myself he was distant because he didn't know how to deal with all of this. That seeing me sick scared him, that he just needed time, and so I gave it. But time didn't bring him back the way I hoped it would. If anything, it stretched the distance. The check-ins became mechanical. His voice lost its softness. His words, when they came, felt rehearsed, like they were being spoken out of duty, not affection. And yet, I still hoped. I think I was more afraid of accepting the truth than I was of being alone. Because once I admitted it, that he had stopped showing up in the way I needed, I would have to let go of the version of love I had written in my mind, and letting go felt too final. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from yelling or betrayal. It comes from the absence of feeling, from the hollow moments that replace connection, from sitting in a room where someone once made you feel like the world, and now you feel like nothing at all. I tried not to blame him. I told myself we all have limits, that maybe he never meant to pull away, it just happened. But even as I tried to understand, I couldn't ignore the way his absence felt like a shadow I couldn't shake. The warmth that once wrapped around me like a blanket, it was gone, and in its place was something cold, thin, and distant. Still, I hoped. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was something real. Every time I heard footsteps down the hall, I hoped it would be him. Every night, before I closed my eyes, I hoped that tomorrow would be different. That maybe this was just a season, and he'd find his way back to me. But seasons change, and some things don't come back. I started to realize that hope, on its own, isn't always kind. Sometimes it becomes a weight. It keeps you looking back instead of forward. It keeps you wishing for something that no longer exists, instead of making peace with what is. And yet it stayed with me. Even when the warmth disappeared, hope refused to leave. I learned to carry both, hope and emptiness. I learned to smile when people asked if I was okay, even though I felt like something inside me had gone quiet. I learned to talk to myself in the silence, to whisper words of comfort I once believed would come from someone else. It's strange how you can miss someone who's technically still around. But presence isn't just being there, it's caring, it's trying, it's showing up in the ways that matter. And he stopped doing that a long time ago. Hope stayed because that's who I was, but the warmth was gone, and I finally stopped pretending it would return. I think the hardest part was that he never said goodbye. There was no last call, no message filled with finality, no closure wrapped in words I could reread and make sense of. Just silence, a silence that stretched and deepened until I had to admit to myself that the ending had already happened, even if no one had spoken it aloud. It wasn't always this way. There were days when his presence felt like home, when we spoke of forever without hesitation. as if it was the only possible future. He made me believe in staying, in showing up when it mattered, in the kind of love that didn't flinch when life turned harsh. That's what I held onto when everything started to fall apart. The belief that he would stay because love does. But love doesn't always know how to stay. And people don't always know how to leave. When I fell ill, everything moved so quickly. Appointments, tests, quiet conversations behind closed doors. It was terrifying, and I was overwhelmed, but part of me kept thinking, at least I'm not alone. At least I have him. I truly believed that. I trusted it more than anything. At first, he was there in small ways. A few texts, a check-in call, reassurances that felt just real enough to calm my worry. But as the days turned into weeks, those reassurances faded. His replies became brief, his voice distant, and still I waited. I convinced myself he was just processing, just unsure of how to cope with everything. I didn't allow myself to believe that maybe he was already gone in the places I needed him most. I kept watching the door, expecting him to walk in and prove me wrong. Every time the nurse entered, my heart jumped. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it would be him with words that reminded me I still mattered. But the door never opened for him, and the messages stopped coming altogether. There was never a moment I could point to and say, "This is when he left." It wasn't like that. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow unraveling of presence, the kind of absence that doesn't slam the door, it just stops knocking. And yet, even then, I held on, not because he gave me reason to, but because I didn't know how to let go of someone who never really left. Not in words, anyway. That's the cruel thing about a goodbye that's never spoken. It leaves you haunted by the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it hasn't really ended. It leaves you searching for reasons, writing explanations he never gave. I asked myself 100 questions, trying to fill the silence he left behind. Was it fear? Was it guilt? Was I asking for too much just by needing him there? But the truth was simpler and more painful. He didn't say goodbye because it was easier not to. Because leaving quietly means never having to admit you walked away. It means never facing the weight of what that choice does to someone who believed you never would. And I was left with that weight, left to carry all the unsaid things, the unanswered questions, the ache of a love that vanished without warning. I would have rather heard words that broke my heart than be left with silence that bruised my soul every day. At least words give you something to hold, something to set down when you're ready. Silence just lingers like a shadow you can't outrun. I stopped expecting him after a while. The waiting turned into stillness, the hurt into something quieter. I learned to breathe through the emptiness, to wrap myself in my own comfort, to speak softly to the part of me that still missed him. And slowly, I started building a life that no longer made space for someone who couldn't even say goodbye. But even now, sometimes when the nights stretch long and I can hear my thoughts too clearly, I wonder what it would have sounded like, a goodbye, a final conversation, a single moment where he looked me in the eyes and told me the truth. I wonder if it would have made it hurt less or more. There are wounds that heal, and there are ones that simply become part of you. His silence became part of mine, and though he never said goodbye, I finally did. I never got to say goodbye, not because I didn't want to, but because you never gave me the chance. You just slipped away like we were nothing, like all those promises meant nothing. For the longest time, I waited for a call, for a message, for something real. But silence was all I got, and I carried it like a weight I didn't know how to put down. I kept wondering what I did wrong, what changed, why pain made you run when I needed you to stay. But now I understand, not all love is meant to last, and not everyone who says they care knows how to stay when it's hard. So here it is, the goodbye you never gave, and the one I finally needed to say. Goodbye to the version of you I held onto for too long. Goodbye to the silence that taught me how to speak again. Goodbye to the waiting, the hoping, the hurting. I'm letting go now, not because I stopped caring, but because I started caring about myself more. You walked away without a word, so I'll be the one to end it with one that carries everything you left unsaid. Goodbye.